And he says, delete. And so I think our hands, as my grandma, who I don't know why, but this old woman works her way into every presentation that I do. I don't write her in, but she works her way in. Because she taught me when I was a little boy. She said, baby, if it's ever in your hand to do good to another human being, she says, baby, never turn your hand against them. How simple is that lesson? How Christian is that lesson? So I work with a lot of students here. I work in universities, I work in the community, and I always teach my students, if you have the power to help someone else, you should help them. Well, what if they don't need it? Or what if they're lying? I said, if 100 people ask you for help, 100 people ask you for help, and only one of them really, really needed it, how would you figure out which person that was? Well, I like the way you look, so maybe I'll help you. But I don't like the way you look, so you don't get the help. And you don't get help. Are we going to parse 100 people till we figure out the one that really, really might need the help? Or is this simple message, help the people you are able to help? If that's one person, help that person. If that's 2 people, help 2 people. If that's 100 people, what should be your responsibility? To help 100 people. And I says, really, if that one person only needed something, the rest of them, I said, what did they really get away with anyway? They didn't really get away with anything. And as the parable says, the 99 sheep and the one that got lost, which one was most important? The one that got lost. I was in Turkey. They asked me to send a proposal for a speech in Turkey, international conference. I wrote the proposal, it was like 10 pages, it wasn't that difficult, called A Graceful Act of Reconciliation. And they called me and they said, we want you to come to Turkey. And as you guys know, I work in the universities around here, and my colleagues, they were aghast. They says, you better not go to Turkey, they're shooting Christians in Turkey. My children were even worried. You shouldn't go to Turkey. It's dangerous there. And I thought about it, and considering, the situation for black men in America, I said, I could get killed right here in America, driving down the street. So this is a lifetime opportunity. So I went to Turkey. Do I look Turkish? Think I speak Turkish? No. And I landed, and one person spoke English and Turkish. Everybody else only spoke Turkish. And they picked me up at the airport and they said, we put all other speakers in the hotel, but we want you to stay with our families. So I was fortunate to be in 3 Turkish households. I'm proud to say I got 2 grandmas in Turkey. They don't speak English, I don't speak Turkish, but I hear from them even as recently as yesterday. We miss you, Turkey loves you. You think anybody in Oregon ever told me Oregon loves you? I ain't never heard that one. Oregon kind of tolerates me, I think. But I'll tell you about one grandmother who was 93 years old. She was so short, she reminded me of my grandmother. And she walked up to me and she couldn't quite see me. She was looking at me and she reached up and grabbed my collar and pulled me down really close to her so she could look in my eyes. And she looked at me for like 30 seconds, 40 seconds, just looking. And I'm like, what is grandma doing? And she turned to everybody in Turkish and said, he's good. Made me cry. Because guess what my old grandma, I brought her with me, by the way. Guess what my old grandma used to tell me when I would get in trouble when I was a little boy? Baby, you are a pretty little black boy, and you are so smart, and you're such a good boy. You're gonna make a smart man one day. And you got pretty teeth, brush them so you can keep them. She's a practical old woman too. So did that grandmother in Turkey see Black Johnny? Did she see American Johnny? Did she see Christian Johnny? Did she see straight or gay or lesbian or trans or anything? What did that old grandmother see? She saw another human being. And she looked at me long enough till she made an assessment. In 30, 40 seconds, he's good. It made me come back here and wonder, what do we do to each other when you meet a new person here in our society? And they got to dig their way through all the different things that we might already think about them until we might see another human being. And we might believe that we should treat them the same way we want to be treated. My work has been in education, but also education is a tool. Education is the most powerful social agent in the history of human beings. How many people knew that? Education, not military, not government, not even religion, but education has been at the center of progress for our civilizations. And so education has to almost naturally be connected to social change. And I get to make a lot of speeches. And by the way, this is my least favorite thing because I don't get to have dialogue. I love to have dialogue because I believe dialogue is where we really learn. But there's a poster, and I sent a lot of posters to my mother's house in Tennessee because I am not the child who was supposed to grow up and get a PhD. She says, baby, I had 7 children. She says, you was the one I knew was going to be crazy before you got grown. She says, now you got more sense than all the rest of them put together. This is the way God made us. If you break your arm and it heals, guess where your arm is the strongest at? Where it was broken. And this is why those children are my children. Anytime I meet the children, everybody's like, oh, look at that bad boy, look at that bad girl. That's one of my children, because I know their potential if we can help them to heal. It is so powerful. But this man was in my mama's house. He was looking at the poster and he says, look like your son, what does he do for a living? And my mama said, he helps the bad kids. He works with the ones that can't nobody else teach. My baby can teach them. That's her claim to fame for my work. And it sums it up pretty well. But he says, look like your son is an activist. And my mama, old black Southern woman, she's like, activist? What do you mean activist? He says, well, you know, somebody who goes around stirring things up, you know, raising sand all the time, you know, that kind of thing. Oh, my mama saw, if that's the case, that boy been an activist all of his life. Because I did have difficulty growing up. But I will tell you that many of my skills that I have today came from having difficulties growing up. What I know didn't come from U of O. What I know didn't come from a book. What I know didn't come from some professor telling me how smart they were. It came from the challenges I faced growing up. Being one of those children who got left out. Being one of those children who they didn't think you were smart. Being one of those children who were in fights and in trouble. And people would say negative things about you. I've never forgotten that. I'm an old man now, but when I work with these children, I am working with them, but I'm also working with who? That child that's still in me that remembers what it felt like to be left out, remembers what it felt like to be treated differently. And so it doesn't matter about race, gender, class, sexual orientation, ability, disability, any of the little differences that our children demonstrate to us. We all as adults should think that these children belong to who? Every one of us. These children belong to us. And we should make sure we give them the best opportunity for them to grow up healthy and be able to be productive in their lives and help create this community that we want. When I was in Turkey, there was a young man, well, they took really, really, really good care of me. I need to tell you, I felt at home there as much as I did in Tennessee. And one young man just spent a lot of time asking me questions. I mean, he only spoke Turkish, but he was so curious. He says, what's your religion? I says, well, I'm Christian. His follow-up question was, what does that mean to you? And I said, well, it's It's the way I live my life. It informs how I see my own life and other people. It informs how I treat my fellow man. And he says, could you be a Muslim? I says, well, what does it mean to you to be a Muslim? I had a question for him. And he said something very similar to what I said, that it dictates how I live my life, how I treat other people, how I think about the future. And I said, well, if that's the case, then I could probably be a Muslim too. He said, well, I'm gonna make a Muslim out of you. I'm gonna make a Christian Muslim out of you. I heard from that young man yesterday. He said, I could call you Dr. Lake, but he says that would not be good enough. He says, is it okay if I call you Uncle? Which means I'm in their family. And so these differences that divide our community, I think this is where social justice is really almost a misnomer, because how many people need food? How many people need a place to sleep safely? How many of us, when we get sick, need to see a doctor, get a little medicine so we can get well? I do this with our children, and guess what their answers are? Fourth graders. You guys will be fourth graders for a minute? Fourth graders. When I say you got hungry people in your community, guess what they say? We should help them get food. We got people living outdoors in our community. Guess what the fourth graders say? We should help them get a place to stay. Somebody's sick in the community. What should we do? Well, we should help them get some medicine so they can get better. Should they be able to see a doctor? Fourth graders. Yes. I said, I'm gonna send you guys to Washington, D.C. I'm gonna put you in the seats of people who make decisions about American society. How long would it take us to solve problems that we say are intractable if fourth graders were making decisions? So it tells you where a lot of the problem is in this American society. It's with the decision makers. I tell people I do progressive work with children and I do remedial work with adults. And people laugh about it, but I don't really laugh when I say it because it's really unfortunate. When I talk to children about sexual minority identities, gay, lesbian, trans, guess what the conversation is? That's who they say they are, Dr. Lake. What's the problem? If he wants to wear ribbons in his hair, if he wants to wear a dress, what's the problem? Or if she wants to wear, jeans and boots, and what's the problem, Dr. Lake? When I talk to adults, well, baby's gonna get raped in the bathroom. How many people know there's laws against raping babies in the bathroom already? And I was a child therapist for 11 years. I worked with the most damaged children in the state of Oregon. And almost every one of them had been physically, emotionally, or sexually abused. By who? Parents, grandparents, uncles, brothers, sisters, people closest to it. Wasn't a sexual minority, people. And so when we think about these complex issues, education is really important, that we understand what these issues are. These issues are being discussed and talked about in our society in a way that actually disserves everybody. I work with people around issues of race and culture and ethnicity, and I've yet to meet one person who can define all three of those terms without going to the dictionary. Also, definitions of race, when we talk about whiteness, I've yet to find anybody, my colleagues included, at PhD level, who can define white. You want to befuddle a room full of white people, ask them, what is white? And then be quiet and wait a while, because there's no clear definition. So as we move forward, we're going to have to unravel these historical issues that continue to divide our communities. With my colleagues at a Christian university, I asked them one day, I said, how many races did God make? 50 plus people in the room, nobody moved. I said, I'll ask the question again. How many races did God make? Nobody moved. So I helped them out. I did what you just did. I said, I'll give you a little hint. Made one. And so if you truly, truly, truly believe in God, if you truly, truly call yourself a Christian, should you have all this trouble talking about race? But if you listen to man, if you listen to the news, if you listen to the media, yes, you will have a whole lot of trouble talking about race and believing that there's only one. Because if we can trust and believe that there's only one, we should treat each other like we are truly brothers and sisters and family. I go out and work with the homeless people sometime, and I found how many people know that one of the biggest things happen to homeless people is their feet rot. How many people know that? Homeless people, their feet rot. And once their feet get wet, there's nowhere for their feet to get dry. So one of the things that we all can do to help homeless people, dry socks and shoes. And so that's what I've been taking. And I got big feet. I got 13s. They tell me, we love when you bring shoes, Dr. Lake. Because you got big shoes and they Nikes and everything else, and they're good shoes that people need. It's criminal that we live in the richest society in the world and we have people die on the street. I saw the hungry people today. I saw the hungry people today and the homeless, and I could only imagine, what would Jesus see? They were dirty and wet, sleeping in blankets on the ground. Park sign says, open at 6 a.m., closed at 11 p.m. These people are invisible between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. They asked me to use my phone, and I thought about the privilege, making a phone call anytime you wanted to. I shared my phone and privilege with them. They whispered to each other, nice man, and asked me for money. And I had none in my pocket. I would have given it all to help them out for today and to maybe soothe my burning conscience. And I realized that we do not see the hungry or the homeless people as Jesus would. We do not ignore them. We donate our pennies to charity to help them. We allocate money to collect their dirty needles. We parse out medical care when they are dying. We feed them breakfast on Sundays. The young men roam like hungry dogs, wandering the streets at night, scavenging for survival. See, it is not as if we do not know that they are there. We do know, but in some amazing way, we simply do not see them as Jesus would. This is from one of my experiences with the homeless people, because it every day lays heavy on my heart, and it should on all of ours, until we figure out how to help the less fortunate in our communities. Time is always a challenge when you're doing this. You guys know I'm a professor. I can fill up a whole lot of time with a whole lot of conversation. I would encourage everybody here to figure out how to create a dialogue in our community, especially with those communities that might not be similar to yours. Those people that may walk a little different than you, talk a little different than you, may live a little different than you, because it's in that exchange that we actually learn how to be more competent in a community. We can't do it alone. You guys know that. You can't do it alone. You need that other person to help you to learn in order to be a better person. And as I started this, in order to be a better Christian. My grandma, as I said, is the reason I stand here in front of you. She was 4'11", went to 4th grade because that's all they afforded a black woman of her time. And she knew racism. She knew racism very well because she had lived it her whole life. If she met a young white woman like you, my grandma at 80 years old would say, yes, ma'am. She said, yes, ma'am, to young girls who were my age. And it hurt me. And I said, Grandma, you ain't got to say that no more. She said, baby, in my day, we had to. So embedded in my grandma's very existence for all of her life was this subservience to white people because it could have cost her her life. So I have a voice. You guys may see I speak, I talk, I do all of these things, but this voice does not just belong to me. Guess whose voice I bring here today? My grandma. Because that old woman lived 95 years, and I guarantee you she could never look at a white person and talk to them without a certain fear. 95 years. But she invested in me this belief, and I don't know what that old woman was made of. At 80, 90 years old, she had the energy to inspire somebody like me, telling me that I was smart. And every accomplishment I've made in my education, I have attributed to her and that belief in me. So if you have children underneath your hand, tell them that they're pretty. Tell them that they're smart. Tell them that they're a good child. And tell them they're gonna really amount to something one day. Because that may live with that child for the rest of their life, as my grandmother's words live with me. I'll close with this for my grandma, because I wrote this for her, called Making Bread, because this woman got up every morning at 4 o'clock in a house with no running water and no electricity. And she made bread every morning. Made me get up at 5. Get out of that bed, boy, you're burning daylight. So making bread. My grandma would smile and get up 4 a.m. before day came and mix her small ingredients to make us bread. She would add barrel rainwater to the dusty flour and fold in a measure of lard. She would add a pinch of salt and a smaller pinch of Clabber Girl baking powder, the little white girl still on the side of the can. With old hands, she would knead and roll out the rich dough and then cut out the rounded biscuits with an open can. She would place them in the oven, hot now from her kindling, and the fire she had started with scrap wood. She would make bread for us children every single morning, long before day. I can still hear her humming old songs and her feet scuffing along the floor. I yet remember the rhythms, and the tunes are familiar even now, though I never learned the words. 80 years old, my grandma had learned how to gracefully manage underneath the heavy burdens of being black and being woman. Privilege had rarely extended to her, and she knew it better than anyone, but that never made her bitter or stopped her from loving us. The white man's ice is always colder than the black man's ice, she told me, and the white man's sugar is always sweeter than the black man's sugar, she said. Seeing this world through clear eyes, she quietly defined herself underneath the burdens and lived a most powerful truth. Nobody defines you but you. She defied expectations and held a sense of self, of black and woman, proud, loving, and strong. Being black and being woman, she carried both burdens for an entire lifetime, yet she still made bread for us children every morning. Refusing to burn daylight, she would wake me at 5 a.m. and fill me up with both bread and love. Being a frightened little black boy, my grandma hugged me often and told me I was smart, pretty, and a good boy. I yet marvel at the wisdom and love in an old black woman who shined her light and goodness and made bread for me. She made bread for us children every morning before day and hummed her beautiful songs and lived an amazing life. My grandma was a radical and a revolutionary, undermining generations of racism and refuting the claims of privilege by making bread. Thank you.
Softly and tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling for you and for me. See on the portals, he's waiting and watching, watching for you and for me. Come home, come home, come home. You are weary, come home. Earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling, oh sinner, come home. Why should we tarry when Jesus is pleading, pleading for you and for me? Why should we linger and heed not his mercies, mercies for you and for me? Come home, come home. You are weary, come home. Earnestly, tenderly, Jesus is calling, calling, oh sinner, come home. Oh, for the wonderful love he has promised, promised for